everyone. Welcome to the Preemie Chats. Preemie Chats is our weekly educational sessions for healthcare professionals and parents to talk about what matters to you, to explore new ideas, and to learn together. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I'm a Preemie parent and executive director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, as known as CPBF, and I'm happy to be your host today. CPBF is a parent-led charitable organization that helps families in and after the NICU stay through education, support, and advocacy. If you have a heart for preemies, whether you are a family or a healthcare professional, please check our website at canadianpreemies.org. There you'll find resources, the latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who wants to see our little babies thrive. And if you're watching this session live today, please bring your voice to this table. Leave comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them during our program. It is through rich conversations like this that we can advance practice and learn together. So please participate and let us know where you're watching from. And today is our first Preemie Chat of 2024, and we'll bring a parent story. I will bring here Jennifer Degl, who will share what it's like as an ICU parent to suffer through pregnancy and birth-related trauma before a baby's birth, and how that impacts relationships, emotions, decision-making in ICU, and beyond. She also will recognize and validate many of the emotions felt by NICU parents as they watch from the sidelines while others care for their baby, and these strategies to help parents process what has happened and begin to move past their NICU experience and maybe even give back to their hospital or peer groups. Jennifer is here joining us live from New York. She's a mother of 4, including a micro preemie who was born at 23-week gestation and the founder of Speaking for Moms and Babies. Her mission is to educate the public on maternal and neonatal health issues. She's the author of 3 books and articles in both the Journal of Pediatrics and Journal of Perinatology, a passionate public speaker, an active member of the International Neonatal Consortium leadership team, and the International Children's Advocacy Network. She also serves on the board of directors for both the NICU Parent Network and the NIDCAP Federation International. Jennifer is the creator and coordinator of Maria's Hope, the NICU Parent Mentor Program at Maria Fareri Children's Hospital in New York. Jennifer has been a high school science teacher for 23 years and believes education is the key to health reform. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm so honored to have you as our first guest of 2024.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So for all of you watching us live, please do send your questions, your comments, and we're going to have a chat with Jennifer right after her presentation. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone. I just learned this is the first chat of 2024, so it's my honor to be here today speaking with you. I was hoping to share my story with purpose. My daughter and I, which you'll learn in a moment, went through quite a bit to get through where we are today. And it's kind of been my mission ever since to take our story and our experiences and use them to help other people. So I hope that you find value in it and that you take away something that you perhaps can share with someone else in need. So I will start kind of going through my plan. I'm not going to talk for too long today. I have a lot of photos. I do like to story tell with photographs, but I want to start going backwards a bit to about 2011. So it's quite some time ago. My life at that time was great. I had 3 beautiful boys that were ages 3, 5, and 7. And, I'm an only child. My husband had 1 brother. Perhaps that is the reason why we wanted to have a large family. But we sort of said to each other, we want one more child. Boy or girl, doesn't matter. We want to have 1 more. And everything was going pretty well in my pregnancy. I did unfortunately have to have 3 C-sections with my prior pregnancies because my older son was really, really large, and labor didn't progress. And my second son was breech. And then my third child, I had to also do a C-section, because after 2 C-sections, they don't let you go backwards to a regular birth. So I was told I might have a couple of complications with this 4th pregnancy, and I had a bit of spotting, nothing too crazy. And it did feel a little bit different, but I just thought it was, my 4th pregnancy. As was mentioned, I am a high school science teacher, and because my pregnancy was going well thus far, I, at 17 weeks, went on a field trip with my students and many other adults to a reservation upstate New York. And it's a fabulous field trip with our 9th grade students. They are experiencing nature walks, stargazing, owl calling, a very great trip. And I did take my own car because I was pregnant, and I thought, just in case, I don't want to be stuck on a school bus. And it was an overnight trip. I didn't participate in any of these strenuous activities. I didn't walk. I really just stayed close to the main area, just actually more rest than I would be getting at home with 3 boys. But that night at 17 weeks gestation, I went to sleep and in the cabin, and I woke up. What I thought was my water breaking, but and it was dark, so I was able to turn on a flashlight, and it was not water. I was hemorrhaging, and you could imagine the fright. It was, very scary. I had a student with me who was a 10th grader, so that was 1 year older, who I took on the trip as a helper with all the other girls in the cabin. And I think I went into shock right away. I woke her up and I said, I have to take myself to the hospital. You're in charge of these girls. And I kind of left. There are adults in every cabin, but the cabins lock from the inside, so I wouldn't have been able to get through. And I walked to my car, which was about a half a mile down the hill, but there was no cell phone service to call for anyone anyway. Looking back, that is not the sound decision, but when you're in shock and you don't know what's going on, you don't really make the best decisions. So I did walk to my car. I got in my car, and I had grabbed some towels from the room where the kids had hung up their towels from showering. And I just took them with me in the car and kind of sat on them and went. Eventually, I did get a cell phone signal, was able to call my husband, tell him I was driving to the hospital, was able to call another one of the teachers and the main security guard at the campsite and let them know I wasn't there and to check on the kids. And I took myself to the hospital. At this point in time, I, again, in shock. I did not drive to the emergency. I drove to the main entrance where I always went, a very small country hospital. And I got out of my car, walked over to the main doors, and they were locked because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and it's not open for business unless you go to the emergency room. I couldn't walk any further, and I sort of sat down. I don't know how long I was there, but eventually there was a security guard that came through, saw me, and took me in. Initially when I first arrived, I did get what, was very bad news. There was not an ultrasound person available to check me at this point because they were on call in a little country hospital that I was at. So they told me I most likely, lost my baby. And I was, preparing for that, very upset. My husband came, my parents came, and I had to wait almost 2 hours for the ultrasound technician to come in, and hemorrhaging all the time, getting blood transfusions. And the ultrasound technician did come in, and she said to me that I did not lose the baby. And despite everything that I was experiencing, the baby seemed to be doing just fine. A little bit of an elevated heart rate, but everything was fine. And they were able to give me some medication, transfusions, and I spent a few days in the hospital. So when I left the hospital, it was under conditions. I would have liked to have stayed, but unfortunately I couldn't because I had stopped bleeding and I wasn't at a viable term in my pregnancy yet. So they wouldn't just keep you there preventatively. So I was sent home, put on bed rest, and told not to return to work, don't do anything strenuous. But I could move around lightly in my home and do what I needed to do as long as I wasn't bleeding. And they just said, we hope that it doesn't happen again, but we can't treat you because you're not viable yet. They told me I likely had a placenta condition. They couldn't tell which one it was yet without, doing, surgery or looking carefully. It was too early in the pregnancy to see what condition it was. So I was sent home, and I was able, you could see that photo there, all the way in the right side. You should be able to see a bit of a wheelchair. I had to be off my feet for the majority of the day. And it was my son's first Holy Communion. I didn't want to miss that. We couldn't reschedule it with the whole class. So I was able to attend in a wheelchair and go back home to my bed. So now at 19 weeks, so about 2 weeks later, I'm being home from the hospital for a little over a week, just really sitting in my bed, not doing very much. I had another hemorrhage in the middle of the night in my home. And I took a couple of steps and I wasn't really able to get too far. It's difficult to talk about and also to explain. It was an instant gush almost and causing me to be very weak. And I sort of fell down and we called the ambulance. Somebody else called the ambulance and was rushed back to that same country hospital once again. Unbeknownst to my boys, I might add, they were soundly asleep. But this was also the middle of the night around the same time, ironically, and they didn't know. So this time being told even more news, that was terrible, that it was probably a placenta accreta condition, and I would probably not ever make it to a viable part of my pregnancy, and it was dangerous for me. And you could imagine the conversations we had about terminating. We were advised to. We discussed it quite a bit. At this point in time, we didn't feel that we were there just yet. And I spent another week or so in the hospital being transfused, giving medication, and again sent home because I still was not viable. And they wouldn't keep you there at that point in time. They were considering it like an imminent miscarriage in the future. So I was sent home once again. The same scenario, again, around the same time at 1 a.m. This part's a little difficult for me to talk about, and I will try not to choke up. This was very different. I took one step, passed out on the floor, and that was it, and was hemorrhaging so much. I barely had any blood volume left. My blood pressure was quite low already, because I hadn't recovered from the other hemorrhages. I woke up to the ambulance workers unscrewing the hinges in the door of my bathroom because they couldn't pick me up. They were afraid to, and they couldn't fit the gurney in the door. So they were taking the door off. Arguing going on between my father-in-law and the ambulance driver about where to take me because that same country hospital doesn't have a NICU and they don't have a trauma center for adults. It was a country hospital and they wanted me to go to the larger medical center. What's sort of, amazing and a miracle in my opinion is that the ambulance driver was one of my former students. And when I woke up, I saw his face and I said, you have to take me to this medical center, even though it's a half an hour away. And he said, okay, Mrs. Degl. And that's where I went. And that saved my life and my daughter's life, just that moment. So when I got to this medical center, the larger hospital with all different kinds of doctors and nurses and a trauma center for me and a NICU for my future baby, they were able to stabilize me again, but they kept me there because I was 21 weeks, getting close, and I was kind of adamant that I really wanted to have this child. They also told me previously at the last hospital stay that I was having a girl. And I didn't mind, I didn't necessarily care what I was having at the time, but once I was told what the baby was, she became so real to me, and I wasn't about to lose her. So I was in the hospital then for another 2 weeks. And then at 23 weeks, I hemorrhaged again. in that hospital bed, having not even gotten out of the bed. I'm talking sponge baths and commode, catheter, not moving at all. And I still hemorrhaged again at 23 weeks. And that is when you see my daughter being born there. I did not meet her for a few days. That is my husband's hand. And she was 575 grams, or 1 pound and 4 ounces, and only 11 inches long. It's hard to look at now that she's okay today. It's a little bit easier, but that's difficult for me. So I want to stop for one moment, and then I'll sort of speed up the rest of our story. All of that trauma happened to me and my family before my daughter was even born. This was before we even entered the NICU. So you can imagine, and I'm sure that many of you, hopefully not, have experienced this, but you have all of that going on, all of those experiences, all of that trauma, fear, anger, confusion, and that is before your child's even born, before you even enter into the doors of that NICU. And that really can contribute to a lot of emotional stress and other emotional, experiences later on. So going back to our personal story, at 3 days old, I was finally stable enough to meet her, barely, but I was in surgery for, I think, 7 hours. I had 30 units of blood and a hysterectomy. And it turned out that the placenta had attached to both my bowels and my bladder. And they had to all be surgically separated and had to be put back together, basically, and hysterectomy and all of that blood just to survive her surgery. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm just trying to get through the story without getting too emotional. And all of that, again, was before she was born. So at 3 days old, I was able to meet her, and I had not named her yet. I refused to look at a cell phone picture of my husband or my parents. I just said, I'm going to meet her. And they told me she was critical and she might not survive. And I said, she will until I meet her. I'm not going to meet her on a phone. And I won't name her until I see her and see, what she looks like. I need to connect with her. So that is the very picture that was taken when I first met her. And the nurses told me at least that was the first time she opened her eyes. I don't know if that's true. It did make me happy. And I smiled. And the nurse said to me, I haven't seen joy in your face the entire couple of days that you've been in the hospital, because my SICU nurse had accompanied me to the nursery to see my daughter in the NICU. And I said, that's going to be her name. Her name is Joy. And that's where she got her name. So I want to take a minute, and there's no reason that you need to read all of those, but I want to emphasize something that's important to me, that any emotion that you experience before your pregnancy is over, when you have a child in the NICU, whether it's a premature baby or a full-term baby that has medical issues, every single thing you feel is normal, and you shouldn't feel bad for that. And I want to emphasize that more than anything, because if you're anything like me, I'm a smiler. I work hard. I do everything I'm supposed to do, but I will smile in difficult situations. It's just a habit of mine. I just try to do that, or it's just a natural habit. And that's okay too. But it doesn't mean if somebody is smiling at you that they're okay. And I say that for any of the nurses or therapists that perhaps are listening. A smiling parent does not mean an okay parent necessarily. I wasn't okay. I was angry at my obstetricians for not giving me the information I needed. I thought at the time, I was angry at some of the nurses who I thought were doing things differently than I would have liked to have done. I was angry at my partner, my husband. I was angry at some family members. I was angry that I couldn't drive myself to visit my own daughter once I got home because I was on medication. I thought I should be able to be off of it, due to all my surgery. There's a lot of emotions there. I even experienced mourning, and I say that not to even compare it to mourning when you lose a baby or lose a child. It's not comparable. It is not the same. But you do mourn your pregnancy that didn't happen the way it was supposed to. You do mourn the end of your pregnancy. You mourn that you didn't get to be that big round, that mom that had the big belly, or have a baby shower, or whatever you were envisioning for the end of your pregnancy. If you had a premature baby and you didn't get there, you definitely are mourning that. And that's okay. That's definitely okay to feel. It's okay to feel sad. And another emotion that people don't always talk about is jealousy. And I'm not a jealous person, but I was jealous of the babies that came into the NICU after my daughter and left before her. I was jealous of the babies that were larger. I called them giant babies. I had all of these feelings, and you don't necessarily talk about them because they seem self-centered. But if you feel them, please know they are normal. I was frustrated with some of the hospital staff and isolated, and then of course depressed. And a smiling mom can also feel depression. You might not necessarily see that, but they can certainly still be feeling that. So it took me a month, 1 month, to be able to hold my daughter, because although I was recovering, she was having a difficult time and she was not stable enough. And that picture you see there is exactly her 1 month birthday. It looks like a beautiful moment, and it was, but I can tell you it took about 25 to 30 minutes to set that situation up with the wires and the tubes and my shirt and everything that was going on. And it lasted about 2 minutes. And then she was desatting, beeping and alarming, and they had to take her out, and I was crushed. That was supposed to be this beautiful first time I can hold her. And it lasted less than a song on a radio. But it was still a beautiful moment, but very, very guarded, not relaxed. She ended up spending 121 days in the NICU, and there's a few pictures there of her growing and phasing out of different equipment. Lots of setbacks. 4 months in the hospital. The first month she was critical. She was septic. I was there most of the time, believe it or not. I was lucky to have a lot of support and babysitters that I could come and go from the hospital. But there were times we got called back, even if we just left, turn around and go back, or in the middle of the night. She was very, very sick for quite a while with different complications, but she persevered. At 3 months old was the first time I got to have all 4 of my kids together. And this brings me a lot of joy, and I would tear up joy, which is silly because it's a happy moment. But the whole time she was there for these 3 months, I was yearning to have all my kids together. As a mom, you want to do that. And I'm crying. This was the first time I was able to have everyone together. And you could see the boys were so proud because I hadn't met her yet. And it was difficult on them that's a whole nother conversation, another time, but it was difficult on them as well to just see pictures of her. And we would have them color cards, and I bought little Preemie onesies, like little t-shirts, and I had them color with fabric marker, and I would have the nurses dress her up for just 2 minutes, take a picture so I could show the boys that she was wearing their shirt. And, it's difficult when you have, on the whole family, not just the parents, of course. I'm gonna wipe away my tears there. So after 121 days, it wasn't over. Discharge does not mean back to normal, life is great. You bring home a baby like somebody does with their healthy full-term baby 3 days later. It is just the beginning of the story. And for me, it just added on more trauma because although we did our very, very best to remain free of germs, my other 3 boys never had a play date. They had to change their clothes after school, scrub their hands. Every time they wanted to come near her, they would sanitize her if I let them come near her and touch her. No family coming over, and it didn't matter. She still got sick. She came home on oxygen for quite some time. We were able to phase it down, but she had pneumonia 8 times since she was released. And that was only within the first 4 years of her life. So those are some of the photos there of every time we would be back in the ER, back into the PICU, the pediatric ICU with pneumonia. We almost lost her one of those times. She was very critical. She had the cousin of RSV, the human metapneumovirus, rhinovirus, whatever a regular common cold would be for you or I, that's 2 to 3 weeks for her. and it's still kind of the case today, which we'll get to. But my point is, this is, it's not over after discharge. And to be prepared for that, if you're a new NICU parent, it's different. And you're home and you're more comfortable, but it's still a time where you have a lot of emotions and you are very busy, and you should still, accept all of that and give yourself some grace with all the feelings that you're having. To summarize it, when people would make comments like, "Oh, you should just be happy she's coming home." No, you don't have to just be happy. You can still feel sad and angry and afraid as long as you need to. And that kind of leads into this conversation here, especially if you had a traumatic pregnancy or even just a traumatic birth, just even the day of, you are more at risk for postpartum depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, perinatal mood anxiety disorder, any level of emotional stress, whatever label you give it, you are more at risk if there was any trauma before you even entered the NICU. So I like this comment, trauma lies in the eye of the beholder, because nobody can tell you what's traumatic. You could have had a beautiful pregnancy up until the very end, 40 weeks, and maybe your labor went too long, or you had to have an episiotomy, and that might not bother me, but for you, it was very traumatic. It could be something else going on in your life, or the birth plan wasn't followed. And don't ever let someone tell you that your experience shouldn't be traumatic, because if it is causing emotions for you, then it is traumatic, no matter what it is. And you have the right to express your feelings and ask for help. So moving forward for me, I had a lot of questions. Why did this happen to me? Why did I survive? A lot of survivor's guilt, because there are many mothers with placenta precreta and what happened to me that don't survive. And why did I survive? Why did my daughter survive her 23-week birth when there are so many babies that don't at even later gestations? And those are really serious questions that were really burning in my mind all the time. I had a lot of survivor's guilt for both of us. So I started to write. I did keep a journal and a notebook, and I would encourage any parent who's new to the NICU, if you're watching this, you can get any little notebook. It doesn't have to be a beautiful, expensive journal, or just get paper and just write down, the regular things the nurses are telling you about the weight gain and all of that, because on the days where you feel like you're going backwards, you will be able to see your baby's progress over time if you see it written. But also for your emotional state, you can, by writing it, it just simply helps. And I can't explain it, but it's like having a conversation with someone, but it's you. And by writing it down, it helps you. And after my daughter was home for about 4 months, I read through that little journal that I kept, and I thought, I'm not really finding a lot of resources out there for parents that experienced all of this trauma, all, beforehand and after. So I took that and I wrote a book, and you can see that on the right there. And I'm not telling you to go and write a book, although if you do, that's wonderful. And please share that with me. I would love to support you and share that. But I wrote it because I thought other people would need help. And also at the same time, quite honestly, it helped me process my own thoughts and my own experiences by writing it. I wrote for a couple of websites online, like Huffington Post and The Mighty and all of that. And then I wrote a couple of children's books. The top one there is about being on bed rest, because my younger son had a really hard time when he was 3 and I was on bed rest. So it's to help those younger kids and explain that to them in a less scary way. And then I also wrote a book, my recent one, I Was Small, But Now I'm Tall. And that's really for my daughter and all NICU babies to show their growth through the NICU. There are some fabulous women on here that you may know. There's Deb DeSenza from Preemie World and Kira Sorrells from NICU Parent Network. We partnered up to share our stories, and that's in the Journal of Pediatrics, because we believe that just like you have these Preemie chats, when you share a parent story, it really makes the industry, the medical staff, professionals, pharma, everybody really understand why they're doing that important work. So we did that. I've also written in the Journal of Perinatology with the goal of trying to help the communication around clinical trials be more clear, especially for parents. So you can look that up as well, because clinical trials are key to advancing our care for our premature babies. But some parents are really afraid of them, understandably. So that's what that's about. This is my favorite way to give back, which we'll talk about in a minute. I started a NICU Parent Mentor program at the hospital my daughter was in, Maria Fareri Children's Hospital. It's part of a larger Westchester Medical Center in New York. It took me 4 years to get it going, but it is my favorite thing ever, because we just go bedside, basically, incubator, isolate to another one, and we just talk to parents, and we'll establish these connections and kind of talk to them, but really more listen to them and, help them process what they have going on. We don't give medical advice. We don't give spiritual advice. We primarily are just active listeners and just another face that went through something similar. And it's a really great program that we have going there. I'm also on the board of directors of the NICU Parent Network, which I would encourage you to check out. Also, if you haven't looked up our organization, it's U.S. based, but there's a lot of resources that we can share. And I know that that your organization does work well with Kira and us. We developed a NICU baby Bill of Rights. We first had a parents one, and then we actually recently changed that to a NICU baby Bill of Rights. And that is just basically rights that babies have to be around their family as much as they can, and all of these different things, which is really important work. And we also published a position paper about peer-to-peer support, because every doctor and nurse and social worker, they have your best interest at heart, of course. And the nurses end up really, being your therapist very often. But it's so nice when you have another parent that has been in the NICU, even for a different reason. It's just nice to have that, and that's important. So I want to just take a couple of minutes here and talk to you. And please don't feel that I'm telling you have to give back. There are many, many families that just leave the NICU and they want to put it behind them. And if that's how you process, that's what you should do. But if you feel that at any point in time, whether it's a year later, 5 years later, or longer, that you want to give back, there are a lot of ways to do that. You can start very small. You can just offer to your NICU or another local group to have someone call you if they have a family that wants to talk to another NICU parent. You can collect items like coloring books for siblings, or personal care items for parents that are spending a lot of time in the ICU, and you can drop them off and not have to have any parent interaction at all. You can host a fundraiser. Sometimes even what happens, and it happened to me, believe it or not, you can give back in other ways also. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the NICU. Maybe you just start to foster, dogs, which sounds silly, but that is giving back. You're providing a need, you're helping something, an animal, you're helping families, get placed with a dog. And, you can really do anything to give back. It doesn't necessarily have to be at that place that might have caused you a lot of trauma. And the hospital smells and sounds can certainly trigger that. It could really be anywhere. So I wanted to make a point that you can give back to other organizations in other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be the NICU if you're looking to give back, feeling that you owe someone something. And you don't, by the way, you don't owe someone anything, just yourself and your family. This is my daughter going through the years. It's her first birthday on the left, and she dances and she plays soccer. I am going to say that, life is not perfect. She does have bronchopulmonary dysplasia. She does have some lung issues. Like I said earlier, she was in the hospital 8 more times with pneumonia. She has a rescue inhaler that has to be with her. In soccer, she really can only be the goalie. She can't be offense and running back and forth. She does dance, which is more her speed. It's a little bit slower a lot of the time. We still have to keep her away from large crowds. I have to have her in a smaller private school with only a handful of children, because we tried a larger group setting and she was getting sick too much and then missing too much school because she has to stay out for so long. She had speech, she had occupational therapy for years, physical therapy for years. we just stopped actually the speech this past July, and she's 11 years old. So I won't say it's an easy road, and it's very unique to your situation and your child and your family. But she is 11 now, and I couldn't be more proud of her. And, I have to say, she likes to give back as well. She likes to talk to families. She likes to go to hospital events when they're outside to show off how well she did. She's proud of that as well. So I know I rambled on maybe a little bit longer than I should have, but I hope that you took away something from this today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, Jennifer, thank you so much for being so vulnerable. Share your stories and some tears. I definitely had tears here on the site, but I know some parents made a lot of comments, and you can read them on Facebook and YouTube later, because your story resonates for a lot of us, right? Who experienced the trauma of birth, then ICU. And I want to start acknowledging Juliette. She is an adult now, but she was born preterm. And she said, so true about the trauma lies in the eye of the beholder. Thank you for mentioning this. Generally speaking, not about me necessarily, a lot of adult preemies sadly have trauma too, because of how their early starting life went. And this beautiful quote maybe supports someone experiencing an ICU trauma triggers as an adult preemie, and having, for example, an environment who don't take Disney and ICU trauma triggers seriously. Yes, and Juliette was such a long time ago, but she's such an advocate. She's in the Netherlands, and Juliette has done so much for this community to really bring the voice of the preemie themselves into research and clinical care. And she's always here with us. So it's very nice to have also an adult perspective who share the trauma. So what is your take on that, Jennifer? Do you talk about the early difficult start with Joy now that she's 11?
And thank you, Juliette, for mentioning that. It's very important. I mean, she had a very different life than she would have had if she was full term. We are very careful with her. She's guarded. I don't say limited, but she's had experiences that we have to be very careful. I can't just let her go to a large birthday party or be in a large crowd. We didn't fly an airplane with her for years, and she kind of was always masked when we did things like that because we've been afraid. So it has changed her life dramatically, and so Juliette, I appreciate that. We'll be following, that time with her, and I also want to add, it also changed my boys' lives dramatically. They never had big parties at my house. I couldn't have their friends over if I didn't trust the parent to not send their child over with a little runny nose. Even to me, it would not be your little runny nose at my house, but it is to them. And I think it really does affect the whole family. But of course, as an adult preemie, I'm sure you have so much experience with things being different. So I appreciate that.
Well, and your talk is like, okay, your talk also about my same story, because the runny nose, the no parties in the beginning. I went through also all that because my son was born at 26 weeks, also came home on oxygen for a year. And yes, we're always so careful, and also impacted my older son's life. He was 3 at the time. And it's amazing, like when you're talking, right, how much we share, even though you're in different parts of the world, but it's somehow the same kind of experience. So there's another question here, also from Juliette. Did you feel somehow guilty not being able to continue pregnancy until full term, maybe mourning this as well as a preemie parent?
I did. I felt very guilty. I thought maybe because I went out in the wheelchair that one day that caused my second hemorrhage, even though it was days later. Did I roll over? Did I get up too much? Did I not? What honestly made me the most upset was that I felt like I didn't have enough information before I got pregnant with my fourth, with my daughter. Maybe if I would have talked to a different obstetrician, maybe they would have, warned me against it and told me it would have been too complicated. I wouldn't take her away. Obviously, I'm happy I have her, but I would do anything to not have her have been born so early and have to deal with all of that trauma and interventions.
Okay, so one question that I have in regards to peer support, because this is a lot of the work that you've been doing now, providing peer support, creating peer support program. Did you have peer support when you were in the NICU?
No, that's why I started it. There were social workers who were very kind, and they would come over and say, "How are you?" And with my big smiley face, "I'm fine." And I didn't have that. So that's why I thought it was really, really important. And a lot of groups that are part of the NICU Parent Network, they run their own mentor programs. So I was able to learn from them and start the program. But I would argue that it is equally as important as any other care for parents, because they have a lot going on in their mind, and their whatever outlet can help them is important.
Absolutely. And also, like, peer support does not end when the NICU journey ends at that point in time, right? There's a lot of peer support way beyond the NICU, because of the journey, as you mentioned many times, continue many years later, and the trauma is real. I can totally say for myself, 11 years later, I still have this trauma when my son gets sick. This week he was off school because he was sick, and I'm always on that alert mode that any moment we need to go to emergency, because it doesn't stop at that time. So having other parents to talk about this and understand that you're not alone, I think is so important. Right, Jennifer? I don't know if you've shared the same feelings about peer support way beyond the NICU.
Well, and oftentimes too, I'll stay in contact with the families that I talked to while they were inside the NICU afterwards, because they still need someone to talk to once they go home. It's not fixed.
Exactly, not fixed. So I want to talk a little bit about your writing. You talk about your writing as something very therapeutic that you did for yourself, but you wrote 3 books, and I'm very interested in learning a little bit more about your siblings' book for when you were in bed rest, because we always feel there's lack of support across the board for your older children who is home, who has no idea what's happening. You mentioned you only have your family together for 3 months. We know since COVID, a lot of siblings are not allowed in the hospitals, and they don't meet the baby until the baby goes home, which in our cases, it was over 4 or 5 months for you and I. So talk to us about this book, how this book really helped you and helped maybe other families that have already shared this book with.
Sure. So out of the 3 boys, my younger son, who was 3 when my daughter was born, he really had a very difficult time with me, even just when I was at home in my bed. And then when I was in the hospital and I wasn't available to read to him, tuck him in, he was angry. He's an angry 3-year-old. And the other boys didn't show any sign of that, but he did. And after a while, and then of course, remember, she was in the hospital for 4 months. So I spent a lot of time in the NICU, and just like any parent, you try to divide your time and love equally, but it's difficult when someone needs you a little bit more. So I teamed up with a woman named Angela Davids from an organization called Keep 'Em Cookin', which is a pregnancy bed rest support website. Very good support system for women on bed rest. And we co-wrote the book. I wrote the words, and she contributed these very amazing tips on the bottom of every page of what you can still do with your other children from your bed. And there's silly things like you can play a board game, read this, we can watch a movie, but there's other things in there, other tips that also would help explain to younger children, why is mommy in bed? Why can't she read to me? Why can't she come to my soccer game? And it just helps explain it in a not so scary way. And that it was important. So I'm hoping that future children wouldn't be so upset as my son, was at that time. Mm-hmm. So that's where that came from. And we've gotten pretty good feedback, but it's hard in the whole family. And it's hard as a parent. It's not that you're not considering your other children, because of course you are. You always are thinking of all of them. But when there's something medically serious going on, that's naturally where you're going to fall most of the time. And it is difficult to figure out how to make sure that the other kids are okay too.
So important, because now my older son is 14, and we always talk about what happened earlier in life, in his life, while I was away for so long and so many medical appointments.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to continue having that conversation. And
my son, my older son, who's now 18 in his first year of college, unbeknownst to me until he was finished, his entire essay to get into college was about that experience. And it was really difficult for me to read his perspective about what he had and didn't have and how he contributed and how he parented my other 2 kids at 7 years old. I mean, that'll make me cry again, but it affects them all.
It does. And there is a doctor here in Canada called Dr. Saroj Sehgal, and she followed her preemies for almost 40 years. And she did some studies, and she has this beautiful book and documentary called Preemie Voices, and it's so beautiful. And one time I went to a conference and I saw her speaking, and she was talking about her work with the siblings of that cohort of preemies. And those are preemies born in the 70s. So the outcomes are also very different from the gestational age that we have now. And one of the siblings, she put this quote on a screen, and the quote was, "I wish my mom had told me it wasn't my fault."
Oh.
To this day, I choke when I remember that, because back when I saw that, my older son was only maybe 5 or 6, and was like, oh my God. And I remember calling home and I said, please, I said to my husband, please tell Thomas it wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
Right? He was so young. I don't know what he was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, it still makes me cry, because we don't know the impact, right? We don't know until they are old enough that they can actually voice the impact on them. And I think it's so important for us to be having this conversation and discuss, because maybe younger parents watching us, parents who are still in the NICU on the first year at home, to understand that, I mean, we know, but it takes some time for us to reflect back on that journey, right? And to maybe take some action and address our own emotions, because you're still living the trauma, right? We're still on the fight or flight mode for a while when you get a long time. So it's very important that we discuss this emotion. And I'm so grateful, Jennifer, that you're so open to share your emotions and the journey that you went through with your family. So I want to ask you about your siblings, seeing your older kids, seeing the joy for the very first time, and that beautiful picture, the 4 of them in the hospital.
You know, you can see in the photo, they just were so proud. They just were so excited. We were building it up. You get to meet your sister all together today, and they were arguing about who could hold her. But only my older son was 7. I couldn't hand her off to a 3-year-old. Yeah. But they were so excited. And I remember that day. It's my favorite day too, because she was doing well at that point. I will say that there was a few days before that we tried to have that, and she wasn't doing well. So just to let the parents know, it's not always a perfect scenario. You know, you can get built up to think something wonderful is going to happen, and then you can't do it that day. But that day it worked out, and they were really excited. They went home and they drew more cards for her, and they called their grandparents to tell them. They were really happy.
That is wonderful. Jennifer, if people want to buy your book, let's talk about how they can find your books. Maybe you can give the title of your 3 books and talk briefly about the other 2. It would be great.
Sure. Well, my website is just my name, jenniferdegl.com. You can also find them all on Amazon, all 3 of them. So if you shop on Amazon, that's easy to do. The first book is called From Hope to Joy. Actually, I divided it into 2 parts. The first part is my pregnancy, hope. And then the second part of the book is just joy. And that's her first year of life, which is an adult book. It's a memoir of our story. And then we have Stuck in Bed. And that's the children's book for if you have a high-risk pregnancy, for any siblings that might be confused about that or afraid. And then I was small, but now I'm tall. And that's the last one. I think it's a beautiful book because it really is her story, but it's relatable to any NICU baby and the different milestones that, and you know, as an adult preemie too, because you would go back and see the different milestones that you may have hit along the way. And that's kind of how I explained to my daughter what happened, because she knows her baby pictures are different. She knows she has a different album. Her whole beginning is not the same. And this was my way to explain that to her.
Oh, that is wonderful. So we share your social media handles if anybody wants to follow you, and your website. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was such a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure the audience really enjoy your talk and you being so vulnerable and open to share. And I also believe that when we share our stories, you're always supporting others in their journey, and to understand also they are not alone. We are all in this together, and there is a community of us out there providing support to families. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do for families as well.
Thank you. And to all of you watching us live today, thank you so much for joining this Preemie chat. And a special thanks to our sponsor, AstraZeneca, who makes education sessions like this one possible. Just a reminder, if you miss part of today's sessions, head over to CanadianPreemies.org. Let me share our website right here. And you can see all this episode there, but also all past sessions of the Preemie chat. And we have almost 300 chats on a variety of topics for you. You're also going to find many resources and support options available there. And be reminded that CPBF is a charitable organization and depends on support to continue its important work. Consider how you can support CPBF and its mission to empower families of premature babies in every step of their journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. And we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.